Welcome to the second session of our Virtual Production 201 series. In this session, we will cover a variety of topics on what you need to know in running a volume. I am Susie Zwerman, a visual effects and virtual production producer and member of the SMPTE Rapid Industry Solutions for on-set virtual production. The goal of this video is to give everyone interested in running or participating in setting up a volume a better idea of what to expect, how it will work, and also give them the tools they need to have constructive conversation with others on the project. Today, I am joined by a panel of experts to discuss the most critical information one needs to shoot their first project on an LED volume stage. So let's meet our panelists. Please tell us who you are, the company you represent, a little bit about the types of virtual production projects you have been involved with. In addition, please touch on what kind of services you provide to those virtual productions. And with that, I'd like to start with Gary.
Hi, my name is Gary Marshall. I am the Senior Director of Virtual Production at NantStudios. NantStudios is a full-service virtual production offering. We opened our first LED volume in El Segundo, California at the start of 2021. And during that time, we have seen a number of projects running the gamut of episodic, feature film, music video, commercial, car commercial, game show. We've been very fortunate in the types of projects that we've been able to attract. NantStudios provides everything in a one-stop shop in terms of previs, tech viz, virtual art department, technical operation on the LED volume, and also design and build consulting services. Thank you.
Koby from Fuse Technical Group.
Hi guys, my name is Henrique Kobylko. Everybody calls me Koby, as you mentioned. I'm the lead virtual production supervisor and producer at Fuse Technical Group. Fuse is a full service production house. We've always been in the forefront of using LED for advanced lighting and virtual production workflows. One of the many things Fuse does is design, engineer, build, and run LED volumes, including the first one that really paved the way for the virtual production revolution. We now have several large volumes under our belts, and most of the time, the virtual production team is working on large-scale films and episodic work, but we also do commercial work and other kinds of shots. I'm involved in the design and build of the stages, and I'm the lead at the integrating efforts for in-camera VFX.
Thank you. And let's now go to Joseph from the CarStage.
Hi, Joseph White, virtual production producer and co-founder of the CarStage in Long Island City, Queens, New York. We are a little different in that we are more of an LED wall stage. We craft our environment per the project. We are hyper-focused on vehicles. Our primary clientele is film and television, as well as music videos, commercials. We offer full planning solutions. We can create your content for you. We can help you source your content. We can help you basically from the beginning to the end. We also offer remote solutions, temporary setups on other people's stages. But primarily, we encourage people to come to our facility in Queens.
Thank you. So here's the scenario. There is a team looking to shoot their first project on a volume, and your goal is to give them the best advice possible to be successful when they shoot. Being successful means staying within budget and getting the results they hope to achieve. In our previous discussions, there were a few different topics that came up as areas to consider in this scenario, and I would like everyone to share your take on these topics. First, how would the team determine if they should rent an existing stage, do a pop-up, or build? Gary, I'd like to start with you first.
Sure. Well, as with most things in life, budget is obviously the significant determining factor. How much money does the production have? what is the timeline in terms of when the desire is to shoot, and what is the nature of the creative? Now, speaking about those three things in a little more detail, obviously using an existing stage, that stage has invested the overhead in the LED panel, which is the significant cost behind shooting on an LED volume. So you would be going there and you would be essentially, dry hiring that or renting that for a day or two. The timelines associated with a pop-up or a permanent build in terms of sourcing equipment and components can be a determining factor, especially post-pandemic. We're seeing long lead times on the components needed. And then the creative is the existing stages in the localities that production is desiring. Are they flexible enough? Are they modular enough to be shaped around the creative, or is there a more bespoke solution that is required?
Yes, I agree. Koby, can you sort of explain what a pop-up or a turnkey solution is to a soundstage?
Yeah, basically a pop-up is when we bring this turnkey solution to a soundstage, right? So that means that we're bringing the LED tiles, we're building the wall, we're bringing the rigging components, we're bringing the servers. Most of the time it's in a mobile rack that we already have ready to go. So we're bringing the rendering solution, the camera tracking solution, all of these components that are needed. This is a pop-up stage that usually can be considered for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. And then after a year long, I would already consider a permanent install. That usually is like a curved wall or a couple flat walls, something that is a little bit more easier to set up than a full LED volume with LED ceiling. So that would be a pop-up. We do a lot of those a lot of times. And one of the things that I would mention to this is that I totally agree with Gary that the most cost-effective way is to go to a stage that it's ready to go. But there's only so many of those, right? And we're all really busy right now. So it's that might not fit with a production schedule. So the other thing is production may already have a sound stage ready to go with multiple sets built, and they may be working with a movie star that has a complicated schedule. So in that instance, it may make a lot more sense to bring a pop-up stage to their stage and have it there. And that will allow that production that only has a certain number of shots that they want to shoot in virtual production to benefit from the technology. And I guess the last thing I will say is, like, building a permanent stage can be extremely profitable if you have lots of things lined up to shoot in, or if you're shooting a long-term project. Even a year long is already considered a long-term project. We built one in Australia for a film that it just came out, and it was basically built up and running for a year. We got our components back and shipped back to the US, and that worked fantastically for all the parties involved.
So Joseph, if you're building a pop-up or a permanent stage, what decisions will have to be made and what teams would be involved?
I think, it starts with the creative. It starts with the budget, the demand for the project. Certainly it's easier in a place like New York or California when you're doing it in your own backyard. But if you're going out to, say, Pittsburgh or New Mexico, Ohio, some what I'll loosely call a foreign destination, you have to bring in everything. You have to bring in all the LED panels. You have to bring in the servers, all the systems that are going to drive those walls. The content that you're creating, you're going to need LED techs, which, there's a lot of LED techs in New York and Los Angeles, not so much in Ohio or Austin. I mean, there are people, who do have this experience, but maybe not to the degree of building a very large scale LED wall. Another thing to consider is what kind of support do you need? Is it a ground supported wall, or is it a ceiling supported wall? And the bigger it gets, the more it needs. When you're in a place like New York, where they build buildings, you know, for rough winters, you have a lot more steel in that ceiling that's going to be able to accommodate this. But, you know, when you go to California, there's a lot of ceilings that are made out of wood, you know, and that can tend to drive the decision. I mean, it's also the cold hard reality of there aren't a lot of stages available anywhere in the world right now. So, you know, you kind of have to work with what you got. I mean, we just did one where we had to pull heaters out of the ceiling so we could roll walls around.
Yeah, it's a great point about some of those factors that you might not necessarily consider around, you know, I started in visual effects 22, 23 years ago, wanting to create beautiful images. Little did I know, 22 years later, I'd be having conversations about cooling requirements and
air conditioning
and like ceiling loads and that kind of stuff. And it's all of those other components that really drive the decision. And to Joseph's point, you know, our ceiling at our stage in El Segundo wouldn't support the weight of the LED ceiling. So we had to actually permit permanent steel as a structure that went in first into that stage before we could even build the LED wall.
Wow. And you'll also address how hardware interacts with each other in terms of cameras?
I mean, yeah, there is, it's a very, very complex system, right? Like people talk about camera tracking, but it goes beyond. So like, as everybody knows, you have a physical camera. That physical camera gets tracked. You get a digital twin of that camera that you have position and rotation data. And you also get the phys data, the focal length, iris, zoom of that lens. All that needs to get tracked. So it then goes into the LED wall. But there's like different kinds of camera tracking systems. And it goes beyond just that. We're talking about the signal chain from the camera, the routing systems, the monitoring systems. We're talking about the rendering systems, which are composed of the render nodes, the operating stations, that usually all will go through a lightware router, then into a screen management systems like I need to, back to a lightware router to then be fed into the LED processor that then goes into the LED wall. It's a very, very complex system with redundancies that everything needs to work synchronized. So I would say that there is a lot of information out there. A lot of people can set up these by themselves, but it's probably the easiest way to go about this is looking to the professionals that have been doing this to help you with this hardware integration, because there's a lot that goes into it.
You know, and just on that note, I mean, you know, back to our previous question, do you need it? Do you need camera tracking? You know, what's the best, you know, what do you need for your project? We barely use camera tracking. You know, we mostly we mostly work without it, and we mostly work with photoreal imagery as opposed to 3D models, you know, or game engine rendered models. I mean, I love it; it's amazing, but I think it's really important that everyone understand that virtual production means a lot of things.
Exactly.
You know, it could be a big LED volume. It could be articulating walls. It could be an 80-inch OLED TV. It could be a projector. You know, it really depends on what your need is. I mean, you know, the thing that really was the bell going off for me was the making of Oblivion, when they used projectors and they just surrounded that set and it lit everything and everything started reflecting, and then everyone felt like they were really there.
Yeah.
And that to me was just like, this is where we go now.
That was the beginning of it, that fun projection mapping. That was awesome on that show.
Yeah. I would just add real quick to what Joseph is saying that, yeah, I absolutely agree. And then most people use the term virtual production very loosely. There's a lot of, it's a big umbrella that a lot of things fall underneath, and that definitely ties back to the stage design. You know, are we shooting in camera VFX? Are we shooting XR? Do we need set extensions? Do we need AR elements? Are we shooting video plates? You know, like, is it a car processing shot? Is it a dialogue? You know, all this will dictate, the creative will dictate what the tech will need to be, right? Like, even the rendering system for an XR shoot is different from an in-camera VFX shoot.
Right.
That is different from a car process shoot.
Yeah, and just one final note on that. I would just add that the creative, obviously, budget and creative driving these elements, and a creative example in terms of what's the post-production schedule, how much time has been allotted to do fixes on the post side, or is the desire, and most of the commercials we see is like, no, let's try and get everything that's possible in camera. And an example of where that might not be possible is if the creative demands sort of a lot of vertical tilting, kind of high cityscape type environments, where generally you will see a transition point, you know, where the top of the wall meets the ceiling, and, you know, traditionally you would have a gap there for camera tracking or whatnot. So that's just another factor, another consideration of where does that fall in your master schedule, and how much time would you allot for that?
Right. And Gary, how is important, you know, in terms of leaving ample time for testing, and what type of things do you need to test? Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about testing after an install or a pop-up, you know, if we're doing a full install, we leave at least 2 months for testing end to end in terms of the tech stack. And, you know, there's buffer in there, obviously, but that would be on an install. And then testing content, if it's 3D content that comes to our stage, we normally say to productions, you want to be giving yourselves about 5 or 6 weeks for, you know, a rich, detailed photoreal 3D environment to be able to iterate on that. And we do validation sessions, you know, in-house at Nant, and we sort of guide them through the optimization and the fixes for that. But, you know, as with most projects, timelines go out the window and things get compressed, and it's really about having those people on hand, those experts and those technicians who are then able to problem solve in the moment. But as far as I'm concerned, as much testing as possible, and testing everything as Koby mentioned, that signal flow, right? There's so many variables in that video signal flow that are gotchas when it comes to presenting to the wall from the content, that, yeah, as much time as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. You know, I think we have similar workflows, Gary. Like, when people come to us, I will say, yes, I want to validate that everything is running smoothly. You know, we're not just going to get blindly and throw content in the LED wall. It doesn't work like that. And now a lot of people think it does, right? They think they're just going to hand as a hard drive and there you go, it's ready to go, you know. So no, there is a lot of testing involved. We want to make sure that you're hitting your frame rates, that you're hitting your marks, that the creative looks good. There are things that some types of effects that don't quite work on the LED wall as well. So that's important to mention, that some things need to be sometimes changed. You know, some particle effects don't work correctly with depth of field. There are some shaders that are not the best for what we're trying to accomplish. So we try to guide our clients and help them with the content. Sometimes when you're dealing with big VFX studios, you know, that becomes a lot easier, right? Like, we work with we've worked in the past with Weta, that was very, very easy and streamlined. Like, we work with ILM all the time, right? That those types of VFX houses, they know what they're doing. That becomes a lot easier. But right now, in the virtual production revolution where we're sitting, and it is part of the beauty of this. A lot of people can go and create their own content or bring things from the marketplace and create something of pieces here and there. And I think that it's beautiful, you know, like we should be acknowledging the possibility of doing all of this. But yes, getting everything properly tested is key for sure.
You know, if I could just add too, testing time is also training time, because they're, you know, having these filmmakers come in and see how it works, see where the strengths are, see where the limits are. I feel like every time, and you guys, you know, probably have similar experiences, there's always a light bulb moment, you know, with the creative team where they suddenly realize like how they can move really fast and really efficiently and get everything that they want. And they suddenly just become completely comfortable in the environment. And there's no shortage of prep, you know, there's no prep time that's wasted. I mean, especially, you know, everything is talking to everything else, and you have to make sure that everything is speaking the language that it needs to speak to the other thing. You know, we often, if we bring a camera in that we haven't seen before, we try our hardest to get it in at least a day early or, you know, we'll settle for an hour to a half hour pre-call. But it's, you know, there are certain things, there are certain camera companies that they just take to it right away. There are certain camera companies that you actually need to buy adapters in order to sync the cameras to the screens. And, you know, like, you know, recently I had to call Panavision about something and they didn't even have the adapters in North America. So you really want to be ahead of the game when you know what tools you're bringing to the table to work with.
Yeah,
I think
100%. Our last project at the end of last year was episodic, that they were shooting on film, on analog chemical film. And so, yeah, the hoops that we had to jump through to ensure sync across the stack, and then, you know, your color and your sort of color validation then takes on, you know, a whole new ball game of making sure that that's all correct. So sorry, Koby, yeah, you're gonna
No, I think it's beautiful what you're saying. What I was going to add, and it's interesting that you mentioned that we're shooting a project right now with analog as well, and we have a digital camera to be just a reference camera. So I know perfectly what you went through, because it's not the easiest process. Those things were made 15 years ago. The sync boxes don't quite work, but what I was going to say. Piggyback on what Joseph was saying is that, yeah, I think it's about the mentality of getting the production to understand that things are happening before they usually happen on a normal shoot for them. Like the camera thing, it's a very important thing, right? Production rents the camera. It's a really expensive piece. The lens packages are a really expensive piece of the puzzle. I always want to get my hands before it, days and days before it, even if it's possible, and getting them to understand that they're going to have to get an AC to babysit that camera and rent that camera for us to have it available. It's difficult, but it's necessary. If you're doing lens mapping and you're to get your lens files correct into your camera tracking system, you need that. You're not going to be able to do that on the day of the shoot or on the day of your pre-lights day. So it's about making sure that all of these things are communicated to production beforehand, and that they understand that those are needs. You know, right now I'm putting these things even in contractual things, because if they don't happen, you are going to fail in the end, right? Like, and nobody is here to fail. Nobody's here to waste production's money. So as long as they know, I think they still have a hard time, but
yeah. No, it's an excellent point. It's an excellent point. And we spent a great deal of time actually weaving that into our contractual language. So much so I feel like I could actually pass the bar in California now with the amount of like legalese I now know. But yeah, it's so important communicating that, hey, we need these things early. and we need to get them in, we need to sanitize them, and we need to calibrate. Otherwise, your final result will be compromised.
Yes, and you also hear a lot that there's a lot of LED stages being built all over in the US and all over the world, but there's not enough labor force. So can you tell us a little bit about what type of teams you will need to hire and what skill set they will need to learn to make up this labor force?
Yeah, I guess I can start, right? Like there is a lot of different people involved. We work together with electrics, riggers, with a lot of other components that go into all of this. But when it pertains specifically to virtual production, we are talking about video engineers, LED technicians, LED engineers or leads. You're talking about color pipeline supervisor, virtual production supervisor, real-time artists, engineers, networking engineers. So there's a lot of people that go into this. I would say that if somebody is interested into this, like you need to go on a step-by-step basis. I saw the other day an image that it was a little ladder, and the first step was graphic design, and the last was virtual production. And somebody was just stepping through right to the last step. But yeah, it's trying to understand video engineering components, the gear, how this all works, and then real-time content, right? It's hard to just jump straight into Unreal Engine without knowing like 3D modeling and mapping and lighting. So I think like there is space for engineers, there's space for artists, and there's space for technicians. And it's just trying to find the niche that you want to go into. Right, guys? I don't know if you would.
Yeah. No, I agree with all of that. Yeah, if you're taking it from right at the inception, imagine you're doing a pop-up or an install build, and you wouldn't have the luxury of hiring Koby's team, for instance, or going to Joseph's stage. You're talking about architects, you're talking about mechanical, electrical engineering, IT, networking infrastructure, to think about all those things that I mentioned before in terms of, if you're not going into a purpose-built soundstage, how much power is there going in? If you're building a large-scale LED volume, your power consumption is going to be significant. And then what power have you then, is left available to production that are coming in with all of their things? And then as you go through install, as the guys mentioned, LED techs, riggers, networking engineering, people testing content, and then, really skilled production people. Okay, let's not forget that, of, project managing and keeping everything on schedule and in budget. And then technical operations, motion capture, yes, there's definitely a discrete line between 2D content playback, which we do as well on our stage, and 3D camera tracked, but having people that are experts in motion capture, for example, and knowing how, if production art departments are going to be building very big set pieces, how will that occlude some of the flavors of motion capture systems that are on the market? So there's just so many components. The good news is that I think there's an amazing opportunity in the landscape for people coming from all different disciplines to kind of get in on this virtual production thing, because it does demand some real wide-ranging skill sets.
Yes, there's a huge labor force that has to be created.
And I would just quickly add that, and there is a lot of people that are focusing on training right now. So if you're watching this and you're interested, you're going to be able to find the resources that you need to get into all of this. It's just a lot of work.
Right.
So.
And I one last thing I'd like to throw in on it too is I think it's important to keep it simple. Don't. You want a team that's really communicating well, and they're able to kind of like pick up where each other left off, because there's different things happen at different times. People have conversations that other people aren't aware of, and that can solve problems, that can create problems. I mean, one of the things about the people that we tend to deal with on a daily basis is, sometimes there are big egos in the room, and it's important to have a balance on that team of, who's the right person for this situation, who can be the matter of fact person to communicate what the programmer is saying. I mean, I have an amazing programmer, and when she goes in there, like when someone asks her to do something and her brain goes into a dive and she's inside the machine thinking about everything that she's going to do, I have to stand there sometimes and tell the DP and the director, hey, just give her a moment. She heard you. She's in there. She's thinking about it. But we're not in the real world anymore. We're in a virtual environment. So, you have to give us a little bit of time sometimes in order to make that environment look correct. And as soon as we get it, it's going to be amazing. But, you have to allow for the process.
Yeah, I totally been in these situations that the team's been under the gun, and we've had to say, hey, yes, just give us a second. We'll get there. It happens to all of us. And they're not used to hearing this types of things, like saying, give me a second to a DP or to a director is not the easiest thing, but that's our job, right? That's what the VP Soup is there to do, and to protect our team as well. And in the end, what we're doing is protecting the end product, the client. So I think they at some point it clicks, they understand, and it's all about communication, like you said, Joseph.
Right, thank you. So Joseph, what does a schedule typically look like in filming and volume? Could you talk a little bit about the many different scenes that could be shot, or how many pages a day? What kind of planning is involved with all of the filming?
I think like everything, it starts with the script, right? It starts with, how much work do you need to do? How many set changes may be involved? In our case, it's typically a vehicle, and, in your cases, it might be actual physical set pieces. I've seen people do, a standard 4 pages a day. I've seen people do north of 10 is upward of 15 pages a day. We tend to make a plan with the ADs and with the creatives, so we can kind of set it up like an assembly line. Like, our team prides itself on, we're waiting for them, they're not waiting for us. That's not always possible, as everybody knows, but we do our best to do that. And when we're having these discussions, we often figure out what's the most difficult thing that you want to do today, and we start with that, because that gives us the time before they're in the room to actually get it ready, to dial it in, set it up. If you have to work the content, color it. It just depends. I mean, going back to the testing thing, we do a lot of vehicle work, and every vehicle responds differently. Like Mercedes has infrared barriers in the windows that prevent heat from going in and out of them. That's a thing when it shows up on camera. You don't want that surprise. Or if you've got like a Volkswagen that has a polarizing effect in a window, and you're intending to shoot an actor against a window, and then all of a sudden you're augmenting the fact that it's an LED screen out of the window. Like, you want to know about those things before you're dealing with those things with 100 people standing behind you saying, what are we waiting for?
Yeah. I think, sorry, go ahead, Gary.
No, go ahead.
What I would say is, it's just the thing with the assembly line mentioned by Joseph, is that I think it's very similar to the way that we advise people shooting in a full volume. Basically, is to group your shots as well and try to shoot everything that it's on a single environment on that group, because whatever it takes the most time is definitely changing the scenic pieces around the scenery, the art department, right? Like, if you are trying to change everything in a single day, you may be able to shoot a lot less content, a lot less pages. But if you're grouping all your shots per environment, you're probably going to be able to shoot a lot of scenes that take place on the same environment. Because the biggest time suckers, definitely. Getting the art department in there, changing things around, or let's say that you're in a half volume, a curved wall, and you need to shoot from front and back angles. All of a sudden, you need to flip your layouts 100% around, and then changing the content on the screens is a quick thing, but the physicality of it, we're still in the real world, you know, that is the biggest time constraint that we observe when shooting.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think in terms of, you know, the context of what we've seen on our stage, when you're talking about elaborate physical builds and what you can get in a 12-hour day, I think we've seen sort of 3 discrete setups as a maximum, and that project was successful, and you can attribute the success to it a lot because of the planning and the communication and the pre-production and the tech viz that went into, and all departments being aligned on what was needing to be achieved. Also, we were sort of at the mercy of talent schedules as well, because it was 6 or 7 very high profile celebrities that we were doing this commercial for. They all, you know, had very tight windows of availability, and you know, this one didn't want to be shooting on the same day as that one, because, you know, God forbid they would cross paths with each other, and, you know, this kind of all of these things that you don't even think about. So, but again, it was successful in that the production art department had built a significant amount of the set on rolling steel deck that could come in and out of the volume quite rapidly. As Koby mentioned, it's very quick for us to turn over digital loads, 10, 15 minutes max. But, you know, we're often waiting for a production art department to redress the set. And it's only natural, as Koby mentioned, the physicality and getting that dialed in and making sure the blend between the physical and the digital, it holds up. You know, all of that is a consideration. But I think, again, if you plan properly, you know, there's the right kind of communication, I think you can, you know, sort of max out your ability on a 12-hour day.
Great.
One more thing that I wanted to quickly add, since we're talking about planning and shooting schedule, is the pre-lights day. Basically, it's very, very important for us for every type of shot that you have. For every day of shooting, you're probably going to have a pre-lights day. So that adds to the schedule and to the cost. And this pre-light day just means that the director is not there, the main cast is not there, but we're creating presets and cues and lighting scenarios. So all of this is ready to go when we are shooting. So when talking about schedules, like, make sure that you're adding the pre-light days in there as well.
Yeah, and the art prep day, I think I would, you know, so for the average kind of mid-range commercial that we shoot on our stage, there's 1 or 2 prep or art days. Then there's the pre-light, of which we can't stress the importance of that enough. That's a great point. And then maybe 2 or 3 shoot days and a wrap day, depending on the scope again. But and then for our team, we are normally there at least 2 hours before crew call to calibrate the system, get everything up and running, and you know, so plenty of coffee on hand needed.
Great, thank you. So we are nearly at the end of our webinar, and I'd like to get some final thoughts from each one of you. What are the most important lessons you have learned from running an LED volume shoot? Can you please summarize the one thing you would like to share with our audience? Gary, I'd like to start with you first.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's been a theme of this discussion, but you know, having all departments aligned on a vision is critical and crucial to the success of a project, and planning. Not all creative and not all shots will obviously lend themselves to this workflow, and sort of being open-minded about, you know, what is and what is not going to work, I think, is also a part of the process. But having, like I said, having all departments aligned and having some sort of standards, best practices and alignment. Color is a big thing that we see where content can fall down because of the fact that it might not be coming from a seasoned visual effects CG vendor, which is fine and that's great and it should be encouraged, but certain aspects of now we're in this remote working paradigm and that doesn't look like that's going to end soon. So traditionally people would be in the studio and it would be a bit more standardized and sanitized in terms of what computer equipment people were on, what people were looking at images on calibrated monitors and whatnot. Now we can see people in far-flung corners of the globe creating content on maybe non-optimized devices, and then we receive it and then it enters into a sanitized production environment, and there can be confusion as to why things are not looking like they were when it was authored, and just kind of being on the same page about how content is moving through the pipeline. Again, it's all about planning and communication, really.
Yeah, and Koby, what would you like to share with our audience?
I would agree with Gary that content authoring is a big part. It's super important that it doesn't matter if it's real-time content or video plates, that will always go through a color pipeline to be showcased in the LED wall. So having some sort of content delivery guidelines is important. Sometimes this goes a little bit out the window, but that goes into the most important thing is that planning is key, right? That's what we kept mentioning throughout this entire webinar. And what I wanted to say is that this technology is just a tool. It helps the creatives bring their vision to life. So that's why the planning is so important. But at the same time, there's more room for experiments with all of this. These happy accidents, they happen all the time, which ultimately can result in like a better final product. And then the last but not least, I would like to mention the energy on set. Like the technology really brings a feeling of excitement for most people that are on sets. And that's not what happens 100% of the time on a film set. Sometimes like the energy is not high up, people are running around. I feel like when we are shooting this, everybody is so excited to see the project and everybody's working towards the same goal, that the energy is just amazing. Like one of the examples is the actors, right? They look around and they're constantly amazed on how they are able to see the environment around them and how they can react and act better. So I think those are my 2 cents about all of this.
And would you say you're probably getting better performances from the actors? Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And Joseph, you want to share your comments, what you like to share with the audience?
Those are great answers. I love it because I preach it, I live it. Everything that you said, there is no shortage of testing, of planning, of communication that is ever wasted. I mean, it is so important. But that last part that Koby threw in about, the comfort in the environment, yes, people come in and they get really excited and it's amazing seeing all this world around you, but you have to manage that expectation. You have to help them understand, like, you're not in reality and the tools that you're using don't work the way that they work in the real world. So if you didn't get a chance to test it, or even if you did, it's really important to kind of know where the lines are. I mean, we often draw a line in the sand and then we have a happy accident and we find ourselves 50 feet past it. And, and it's a great moment when it does, but it's just so important to be matter of fact with each other, to create that comfort for the creative to open up and find what's working for them and find what's working for the project, for everyone collectively to feel like you're part of what a lot of people call zone A now. Like, you're in there with the director, the DP, and the actor, and like everybody knows that is sacred territory. You know, so when you get in there, especially, you know, in this new space, because we have so much to offer, it's really important to honor that space and help everyone feel comfortable enough so that they can open up and that they can do their best. And then collectively, we all do our best. And it shows in the work.
Yeah, that's really interesting actually about us all being in zone A. I think it's really interesting how, you know, we're seeing some like folks who would traditionally be in the VFX studio in the dark, you know, in the little cave, now almost being forced out, you know, onto set and having to kind of roll with it, right? And kind of be like, oh, there's these departments and there's camera and there's this and there's lighting and there's, you know, and it's interesting watching that that sort of melting pot and that amalgamation of all these disciplines come together. And there's a really great point from Joseph about intimidation of the technology versus embracing, and how it can kind of polarize some people either way. You know, we've seen directors jump in for the first time on a stage who've never used it, and they've been a little shy about where the boundaries are and kind of a bit nervous. And then there's others who are like, right, give me that camera. I'm going to see what I can break. And really
like independent filmmakers, how do they use this technology? Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, I mean, we've had we actually did a number of things around Zack Snyder's Army of the Dead, where it was a marketing piece that Netflix did, and it was independent creators, YouTubers, people like that coming in, and basically Netflix was like allowing them to run wild on the volume, and it was their own creative and it was their own ideas, and they were sort of playing that out in a scenario. So there was a lot of handheld stuff, and you know, it was really fun seeing how those people who are you know, independent and would traditionally be used to creating content on, you know, much less inexpensive kind of handheld phones or cameras, then throwing them into, you know, like a $10 million LED volume and kind of seeing how they use the technology. It was really eye-opening, actually.
We did an indie that did 2 days worth of work in 14 hours, and it was so impressive. Impressive.
Wow. That is impressive.
Yeah, there is a lot of very, very smart people out there, you know, that are ready to just embrace everything and come and shoot. And there are people that are wanting to get involved, right? So, like, I think there is a lot of different tiers right now of talent. And I think everybody, all of us are like just saying, let's just try, you know, let's do this together. So it's just a beautiful moment to be involved in all of this. We're still creating a lot of these rules and how things work. It's very exciting. And I would say for all the new creators out there, you know, start just studying this up. Start with indie stuff, start with a green screen, you know, get your camera tracking system with a Vive. You know, there is low entry points for people to start testing things out at home. You can do stuff like a virtual camera with your iPads, right? So as long as you're trying to get into an end goal, I think that's the important thing. Get like a point A to point B of where you are and where you want to get in a project, and then see what you have available to do it.
Right.
Yeah, it's no longer just the dominion of your Disney Lucasfilm. You know, this is being democratized across the board
for everyone.
Thanks to you know, folks like these gents on the call and what we're trying to do at NantStudios. It's as Koby says, you can do this. You can grab two 50-inch TVs and a Vive puck, and you know, an Unreal Engine build on a PC, gaming PC, and you can start getting into this and start learning, you know, what's at the backbone of this technology.
Great. And that is all we have time for today. First, I would like to thank our panelists for sharing your experiences. And most importantly, I would like to thank all of you who listened to this panel. You are the future of virtual production, and we can't wait to see what you create. Thank you all.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
luck, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks.